The one, the only Shirley Jackson.
She writes stories with cannibalism in them.
She's gone sick in the head.
You terrify me. How do you do that?
They're just stories.
Shirley has these bouts, and our last housekeeper just quit.
I have an idea. It's a novel about that missing girl.
Sounds trashy. You know how insulted I am by mediocrity.
Shirley? Don't touch my writing. Don't touch anything! Do you know what it's like to have a secret? You are hiding something.
Just inquiring, darling. You're not halfway through a novel you haven't shown me.
She's working quite hard. Every hour, every day.
You're getting on well with the wifey. You don't want my work to suffer too, do you?
No, I'm not one for dramatics. This is between us.
I can see how she relies on you, the way she talks to you, your secret looks.
She's my friend.
Women like Shirley don't have friends.
What becomes of your dear heroine?
This book, it hurts more than the others.
You don't know your subject!
Do not tell me I do not know this girl. There are dozens and dozens of lonely girls who cannot make the world see them. The world is too cruel to girls.
Hi, world. Hi, Hannah.
Hi, I've just gone full screen. There we go. It's come back. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Curzon Living Room, a series of live Q&A events on Curzon Home Cinema. My name is Hannah Woodhead. I'm the Associate Editor of Little White Lies. We're an independent film magazine and website based in London. Back in the summer, we created a whole issue celebrating the wonderful film Shirley. So I'm thrilled to be here this evening in conversation with the incomparable Josephine Decker. Welcome, Josephine.
Oh, it's so good to see you, Hannah. Thanks so much.
If you're watching us live, we're taking questions via comments on YouTube and Twitter. The Twitter handle is @CurzonCinemas, and you can use the hashtag Shirley, and we'll try and read out as many as we can over the next half hour. So yeah, please send in your questions. And I'll start off by saying that it's nearly a year since I saw this film for the first time now. I was at the premiere at Sundance, and I remember it being a really magical experience. A really there was so much kind of buzz and energy in the room, and maybe I'm romanticizing it now because I can't go to the cinema, but no, it really felt like a special moment. And I think the reception for the film at the festival spoke to that, how much everyone kind of loved seeing it. But watching it again over the past year, I have been struck by how much it kind of feels appropriate for a pandemic, and all this time we're spending trapped indoors, trying desperately to create things and struggling a lot of the time. And the way that nature has become a sort of escape for a lot of people, you know, getting outside to do your government mandated exercise is a real kind of form of relief amid everything. I was wondering if you found yourself thinking about the film differently since it premiered at Sundance last year.
That's an interesting question. I mean, this is definitely the strangest release of a film I've ever had. I mean, we had live screenings in Sundance and then in Berlinale, and then that was it. You know, so I never got to see in the theater with an audience, you know, that was like not a festival audience, and it's strange. You know, it's strange. It's a different kind of a release, and you know, if anything, the truth is, it's funny because when I finish a movie, I have a very hard time watching it after it's done. Like, I watched it at the Sundance premiere. I think I maybe watched it at Berlin, but then I think it's the last time I've seen it. So it's been about a year since I watched it, because I get, you know, you just, I don't know. It's like, you can't, it's very hard to like, because what happens is I'll be like, well, God, I wish I could change that. And you can't change anything anymore. So So, I think the biggest thing that's changed for me personally has just been this way of interfacing with an audience, which is such a, it's fun. Obviously, I'm so grateful for anyone who's watching this now. But also, definitely there's the disappointment of not getting to interface in human form and feel the energy of the room and feel how people respond. It's such a funny thing. I mean, I've always been jealous of theater artists because, they get to have that live audience. You can kind of tell, oh, people really liked it, or like, oh, I don't know if it landed so well with these guys, and in film, you get so little of that, it's only really at your release that you get that. And so I think we all look forward to it. But I do think the film, the themes are so fascinatingly of this year in a way. Obviously, so the film is set, after Shirley's written The Lottery, when she's kind of dealing with this influx of attention and has really shut down, I think, because a lot of that attention was also negative. She had the most, got like the most hate mail the New Yorker had ever had for a fiction piece. So she was really cloistering herself away from all that attention, and I think struggling with what to write next. And then at the same time, it's so interesting that The Lottery itself is about a town that annually stones to death one of its members, just because they've always done that. And I think in this year, when we, especially in America, I know you guys have been doing the same in Britain, have been looking at kind of institutionalized oppression and the ways that we've kind of ingrained into our institutions these hierarchies and concepts that are so detrimental, that we've ritualized in a way. Especially as we've been looking at this year, but racism, homophobia, sexism, it's pretty gruesome. And she was writing about that so early, and I think she wrote about it in such a timeless way that I think it's an exciting story to bring to life now. Yeah.
You mentioned The Lottery there, which I think is a lot of people's gateway into Shirley Jackson's work, and of course in the film it's Rose's kind of gateway into it as well. So I was wondering, what was your relationship to Jackson's work prior to taking on this story? Was she someone that you'd kind of grown up reading or discovered later?
I knew The Lottery from, we read it in school, high school, I think, or middle school. And then I didn't know the rest of her work. And in fact, the centennial of her birth happened right. I think it was the year actually that I received the script. So I had just read We Have Always Lived in the Castle because it was at the airport. They were just selling. I was like, oh, this looks interesting. And I loved the book so much. And I was sort of floored that I had known about her other writing outside of The Lottery. And so was kind of just diving into the Shirley rabbit hole when I got the script and then was able to pitch on the project. So, and obviously once I pitched, then I spent the next year deep immersed in as much of Shirley as I could, reading as many of her novels and short stories as possible. And there's a terrific biography that came out that year by Ruth Franklin, called, I think, A Rather Haunted Life. Let me see, I have it right here. Yeah, Rather Haunted Life. And it's so good. It's very so super thorough, but also very, you really get inside this messy relationship that Shirley and Stanley had, and it's fascinating.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned they were selling this book at the airport, because I think it's true that over the past few years, there's been this sort of resurgence with her work, certainly through The Haunting of Hill House, which was such a breakout hit for Netflix. And there was a film adaptation of We Have Always Lived in the Castle, which came out a little bit under the radar, I think around the same time. And obviously now your film. I think it's really interesting that we've seen her work have this kind of rediscovery, I guess, because I think she was someone that she was appreciated in her time, as well as getting a lot of hate mail, but people are coming back to her right now and kind of saying, yeah, she was one of the all-time greats. And what do you think it is about her work that makes her so compelling to the audience at this current moment in time?
That's a great question. I mean, in so many ways, Shirley was way ahead of her time. I think she was writing about she was writing about so many issues. Actually, she and Stanley had, when they were in college, started an anti-racist, anti-fascist literary journal. A lot of her work isn't necessarily like overtly political, but I think it's very political in the way that it describes these kind of subtleties of human interaction, and the way that kind of polite society. You have to navigate polite society, and then but then there's this kind of like brewing reality that's inside of every woman. She was constantly in a lot of her short stories, looking at sort of the townspeople as this sort of enemy. It's a very interesting, which I think of now, we think of sort of as maybe the mob mentality. But she did have a very timeless way of writing. And I mean, I would say that the thing that draws me into her work so much is not only that she has these incredible, very complex, very, very, messy, I keep using the word messy, but they are a bit messy, female characters, who are sort of like brewing with some kind of self-hatred and some deeper question. And then also maybe fascinated by women who are more able to connect to society and live up to the social norms. So I think I was drawn to her, personally, I think I'm drawn to her female characters, but also there's this, she has this, the way she delves into between genres, basically the way she kind of moves from a reality into a subconscious is very seamless and extraordinary. And I can't think of another writer who does it quite like she does, that you're sort of living in one reality and then you don't know when that reality sort of switched over and became a very subjective viewpoint. And so just to speak for me personally, when I found her work, I was like, oh, this is the thing I've been trying to do in my movies, is this kind of slip from a reality into a subjective reality in a way that you sort of can't tell when one became the other. And so, why is this hitting now? I guess it's hard for me to answer that on a larger scale, but I know that there are lots of reasons why I personally feel so drawn into this work. And I think partly because she was writing in a timeless way, and she wasn't necessarily pointing at like minute issues of her time, but she was looking at these bigger concepts that are sort of mythical. I think that work still speaks to us now, almost 100 years later.
Absolutely. I think the idea of her as someone that was kind of moving between genres and bringing ideas together that didn't necessarily naturally go together is something that really draws me to her work. I think she's so kind of slippery. She's very hard to pin down as a writer. She's constantly kind of wrong-footing you as a reader, and she's very mischievous. So I think that kind of really appeals to my taste, to my sensibilities. And in terms of bending genre and kind of taking a new approach, I think before the film came out, there was a lot of kind of chatter about, oh, Josephine Decker's making a biopic, that's unusual. And then when we watched the film, it was like, no, this is not a biopic as you've ever seen it before. So when you came to the script, and I know that you and Sarah kind of talked about these things, like what was the kind of mission statement with this film? Because obviously when it's a real person, there is a kind of feeling of not wanting to disrespect them or to kind of intrude upon their legacy. But you've gone a really kind of radical route with this in a lot of ways, I think.
Yeah, I think we knew we didn't have her life rights, and we didn't have the rights to the biography. What we had the rights to was this fictional novel, Shirley, so it's already one step obviously removed from reality. And then I think the screenplay is another step removed, because we were also careful in the novel, it features her children who are still alive. And so Sarah was like, well, you can't put a living person into a film without getting their life rights. And so we didn't necessarily want to go down that rabbit hole of, and then have to have all this loyalty to real lives. And I think the thing that we were deeply wanting to be loyal to was the feeling that you have when you read a Shirley Jackson story or a novel by her, this feeling that that these worlds can collide, and that you're inside of this kind of two kinds of like female consciousnesses, and then that also that the reality can kind of like slip out from under you really easily. And I think that was what we were trying to be more loyal to than any kind of real life. And I think that was really, and I think it really served the process, because it allowed us to pull from so much of her work and to be really inspired by different elements, and not get too wrapped up in the real life of Shirley.
Yeah, I think to me, it feels like a Shirley Jackson novel that she would have written about her own life, you know, that kind of vibe. It's like if she was to fictionalize things, how would they have turned out? And I think it's an approach that really works in the kind of spirit of her body of work and her kind of style. I think she was always very interested in this idea of creating your own version of events and you know, kind of, that idea of like subjective reality you mentioned, I think is so, I love that in films. I love when I have no kind of idea what's true and what's not, especially again watching your films. I think especially with Madeline's Madeline, that's something that I was so kind of beguiled by about that film, is this sense of not really knowing who to trust. I think in books it's kind of sometimes easier because you're so deeply embedded in what's on the written page, you're so with these people for hours and hours. But with films it can be quite tricky because you've got a limited amount of time and you've got to kind of get this across. And it's just, yeah, I think that it's a real kind of feat to pull that off. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We've got a question from Adam Morling via YouTube. He says, you create a feeling of kinetic unease very much from the first person perspective without ever following a cliched visual approach. Could you talk about how you conceptualize your work in pre-production?
Yeah, well, I guess maybe I'll speak specifically to the cinematography. Sturla Brantgravlin was our DP and is brilliant and such an artist. And so we ended up having very little prep time with the actors, but I had a good amount of prep time with him. And so we really went through each scene. And it was funny because I think we had like 6 weeks to prep, but I think we only made it through the first half of the movie, which I think happens like because we were so thorough. But really being like, what is the scene about and who is the person seeing the scene? And I think prior to Sterling even coming on, I had kind of, when I pitched on the movie, I'd pitched a very subjective feeling so that you feel like you're in this very intimate, soft world when you're in Rose's perspective. And that when you feel Shirley's perspective, it's a bit more complex, a bit more like intellectual and graphic and potentially harsher, but also more, maybe a little bit more alive. It's complicated. And so when we were going in through the script, we were sort of really looking at, the first third of the movie is really through Rose's eyes. And then one of the tricky things about this project was that the script does change. It becomes Shirley's perspective, and she has these visions. So you have to somehow prepare the audience for that while also being loyal to Rose's perspective. So actually a bit in editing, we had to do some work to kind of like bring Shirley up front and make sure that you knew that eventually you were going to go inside of her mind. But so we had these, like, I think there were like 5 approaches to different scenes. So that with the Rose scenes, it was very subjective, like close to her face, and then obviously seeing through her eyes. We had, when Shirley and Rose kind of come together, like for instance, we called it the midnight kitchen scene, when they first kind of sit down together and toast. When you're in this kind of like space that's a little bit of a dream and the women are sort of connecting, we had this concept called creature, where the camera is like a creature or even like a baby. So it has to be kind of close to the person, close to a person, or if it goes to the other person, it has to crawl along a surface. It can't just like pan in the air. And that, I think, lent a certain vibe to that, which I feel like was a bit, Shirley inspired. And then there was, we had, for the townspeople, because Shirley Jackson, she writes the townspeople in her stories in a very like buttoned up, like everything is extremely formal. So we had a very different look when we went into the town, which sometimes I wonder if it's a little jarring, but I think it does hopefully sets it apart, so that when Rose goes into the town and Shirley sits down to write, it almost feels like all of a sudden you're watching like a movie, like you're watching these like very formal frames, and Rose is like, part of these larger frames, and it's a little bit more stiff. The framing is very stiff. It's the main time that we used sticks on a tripod in the movie was those scenes. And so trying to bring that out. And then this is like, there's so many things. And then, maybe finally when Shirley and Stanley are together, we tried to have this very kinetic energy that kind of, because the energy passes between them so powerfully, they're so like alive, their forces meet, so the goal for those scenes was always to like let the energy of one person like land on the other and really follow their energy through the space, so that we were letting the camera be driven by the action. So there was, we really were in the cinematography really thinking about how do you bring out these different kinds of relationships, also their relationship to reality, because I think there's, with the townspeople thing, there's a way to read the film of, maybe does Rose even exist? Or was she just a figment of Shirley's mind? Was she always just there to be inside of Shirley's story? And I think that cinematography brought that out a little bit. But how to kind of bring out the lens of each relationship, and, and there's an equality to the way we shot the Stanley and Shirley stuff that maybe isn't so much there in the way that we shot the Rose and Shirley stuff. So it was a lot of thinking. We did a lot of thinking ahead of time.
I completely think it shows, and it's fascinating to hear about these different concepts for the different kind of parts of the film, the different perspectives of the characters. I think you're talking about, you mentioned the townspeople element. I think one of the areas it becomes most kind of obvious to me is in the party scene, where you've kind of got this real, like, you feel kind of as on edge as Shirley and Rose do there. And I think there is that sense of this very stuffy, like, kind of old school group of people butting up against these two outsiders who are throwing sandwiches on the floor and placing curses on people. I think it's probably one of my favorite scenes of the year. I think it's just such fun, it's such a, we've all been at that party. I think it's a really beautiful moment. And of course we should definitely talk about your Shirley and Stanley, because Elizabeth and Michael are so just incredible in this film. It's so fun to watch them kind of go at each other, and to watch Elizabeth and Odessa work together as well. I know that Elizabeth was one of your first choices to play Shirley. So could you talk a little about what your pitch was to her, and kind of what inspired you about her as an actress that made you think, yeah, she's Shirley?
I had wanted to work with her for so long. I feel like, I don't know that she's ever played a character that I didn't just 100% believe. Like, I feel like I'm always just with her, and I'm not questioning the world. I'm never seeing the actor. I'm seeing the character perform, like live their lives. And so, I don't know. She was just one of our, top choices. And our producer kind of slipped her the script. They are friends. Sue Nagel was one of our producers. And so she kind of slipped her the script, and she was really interested, so it wasn't hard to convince her. The script is very strong. The script is so good and funny and playful, and very alive. And that character obviously like jumps out of the page. Like, she seems like she'd be fun to play, and I think Elizabeth was excited to try it. Yeah.
I definitely I spoke to her last year when we were doing our issue, and the first thing she said to me was how much she loved the script. She was like, it wasn't a no-brainer. And I think she's someone that's really built up this kind of personal canon of difficult women, or kind of messy women, and I think from Mad Men right through to The Handmaid's Tale, she's always she's always kind of challenging herself to play these women who are kind of spurned by society or mistreated, and kind of keep going despite everything. I think she's definitely one of the most interesting actors working today, and it was always seems to be keen to turn her hand to something new. So I think I can definitely understand why she was attracted to this project. We have another question from YouTube from Catherine Wright. How did your creative process shift working with a story that was based on a real person versus one that was fiction of your own making?
I would say one of Well, it was nice. Firstly, it was really nice to have all the research. I mean, it's so, when you're writing your own character, you're constantly trying to deepen that person and talk with the actors and try to draw out who is this that we're about, that we're about to make a film about. Which you have to go kind of deep to find that. It was exciting to make a film about a real character, a real person, because there's just so much about her. There's so much nuance in her real life, and there's so much written about her, and then she has written all these books. So it was just exciting to get to draw from that much literature, basically, to research the film. I guess, a challenge was definitely that when I write, this is the first film that I directed that I didn't write. I think when I write my own work, I tend to write dialogue as an excuse to create an image that's in my head. So I'm seeing something first and I sort of jot something down so that I can make this image happen. But I think something that is a little bit more, that was interesting about Shirley was that there's these gorgeous and really complex scenes that are long. That's a lot of the scenes in the movie are 3 to 5 pages of dialogue. And most of my films, if you've seen them, are like almost no dialogue. It's like bodies moving in space doing weird stuff. So I think that was definitely a little daunting to me, and I was nervous about that. And I'm so grateful that I had such a terrific cinematographer that he was so on board. We were not going to just do close up, and done. But also when we got these incredible actors, I mean, I just cannot believe what incredible actors. I mean, there were many times when I was shooting this movie where I was like, oh my God, it's like, it's like if you've been playing, this is not to diss any actors I've worked with before, but it's like, it's like if you've been playing on like, your first violin, and then all of a sudden you get like Mozart's violin, you're like, I didn't know it could be like this. It's so these actors are just, not only are they stunning, incredible, and some of the best actors working alive, I think, they also have way more experience doing their craft than I have directing. I mean, as a director, you're on set maybe, if you're lucky, maybe like 2, maybe 3 months a year. That's a lot, Actors are on set, like, I mean, Elizabeth especially is on set. She's on set, like, I bet she's on set 300 days a year, at least. She is a powerhouse. And then Michael is a tour de force. He went to Juilliard and is just like, can kind of do anything. And he makes it look like he can do it in his sleep, but he is such a researcher. He goes so deep. So I really wanted to build the world with them. And so even though we didn't have very much prep time with them, but what we did was basically in the mornings when we would get into rehearsal, I would really just take the time and not be like, okay, you're going to sit here, you're going to sit here and then shoot. It was like, okay, let's block this. Let's move this through the room. Like, when do you want to be close? When do you need to move away from each other, and create a dynamic in the dialogue that was a bit more musical, and also allow them to follow their own instincts, because they're such terrific actors, and so many beautiful things emerged. And it was often, it was just giving them the time and then trying to get out of the way, and then every once in a while weigh in, if they needed an extra opinion. But a lot of it, that I think directing a lot is like about supporting talented people's instincts, because they're usually very good. So I thought for this movie especially, a lot of it was just pushing collaborators, not just the actors, but everyone, DP, sound designer, production designer, just trust themselves and make the choice that is maybe a little bit scary or vulnerable, and that's probably the right one. And it was exciting to see what happened. Yeah.
I think a lot of the filmmakers I interview, one of the kind of things that comes up time and time again is no matter how you want the shoot to go, it's not going to go that way. So you might as well, kind of take the chance, take the risk.
Yeah.
And as someone that I know that you come from a kind of more experimental background, I was wondering how this process was, because you'd had so little prep time, and it was kind of a bigger budget, a bigger cast. What did you feel any kind of additional pressure, because there were all these new kind of elements coming on board?
Well, definitely. I mean, I was totally terrified. Yeah, and in a way, I really thought this movie, it's always so funny, like the movie you end up making, sometimes it's the movie you have in your head, but yeah, definitely this one, I think I thought it would look a little bit more like Hitchcock and a little bit less I mean, this just, it looks very Josephine. It's like so me. But I mean, but I think in my mind, I was like, it's going to be like so Hitchcock, you know, but then I like kept being like, let's just get closer to their faces. You know, there's this like intimacy and subjectivity that I always am curious to bring out. And, you know, and so I don't get to do the, you know, graphic wides. Someday I'll do a movie where there's a lot of graphic wides, but this was not that movie. But also I don't think it's the movie for it. You know, it's a movie about woman trapped in a house. So there's not that many wide shots you can really get in this movie. And also a period piece is, you know, it's a fairly low budget period piece that it's hard to do anything period outside of a house. So we just, yeah, we let it be, we followed our instincts, which were to play into the subjectivity and the kind of like emotionality of it. But it is interesting to, yeah, that's always a thing. I think I
think that Hitchcock via Josephine Decker is, you know, a kind of the best we could hope for. I think it, you know, and someday we'll get you those wide shots. You'll be away by then. Thank you so much for joining us for this Q&A today. It's been an absolute delight to speak to you about this film, which I hope when cinemas reopen, I hope that programmers program it again. I think, you know, one of the great, well, not great things about the pandemic, but one of the nice things I think is that there are going to be a lot of films that have come out for your streaming that are going to find a kind of second life, and I really hope this is one of them. In the meantime, you can stream the film on Curzon Home Cinema, and if you enjoy the film, please tell all your friends, and there are going to be more Curzon events, so again, tell everyone you can. You can follow Curzon Cinemas on Twitter and Facebook for details about the next Q&As. I've been Hannah Woodhead. Thank you for joining me, and good night.